Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey back in time, all the way to a bustling, muddy, utterly fascinating European city. Imagine yourself there for a moment. The narrow, winding streets are alive with the clang of blacksmiths, the cries of street vendors, and the distant chiming of church bells. The air, well, it's a fragrant mix of baking bread, horse dung, and, if we're being honest, something less pleasant you can't quite identify. You're navigating crowds of merchants, apprentices, and nobles, all hurrying about their day. But as you walk, you notice something missing, something rather fundamental to the symphony of sounds and smells you might expect. There are no playful barks echoing from alleyways, no enthusiastic tail wags greeting you at shop doors, no scuffles of stray dogs competing for discarded scraps. In fact, you'd be hard-pressed to spot a single canine companion. It's a bit eerie, isn't it? Because tonight, we're re-exploring the genuinely peculiar period when an entire European city decided to do the unthinkable. It banned all dogs. You might think, well, that sounds rather inconvenient, and you'd be right. You probably wouldn't survive a single afternoon without a mild sense of existential dread. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, let me know in the comments where you re-listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins in medieval London, a sprawling, vibrant, yet undeniably grimy metropolis. Picture it, the River Thames, a highway of barges and fishing boats, serves as both the city's lifeline and its primary sewer. The streets, often unpaved, were a chaotic mix of human and animal traffic. You'd find pigs rooting through refuse, chickens pecking in doorways, and horses, of course, everywhere, pulling carts and carrying riders. In this bustling ecosystem, dogs had always been an integral, if often overlooked, part of the landscape. They were the unofficial cleanup crew, scavenging scraps that would otherwise fester, providing companionship, and sometimes even a crude form of security. For centuries, dogs lived largely unrestricted in London. They roamed freely, belonging to no one and everyone simultaneously. You'd see the pampered lapdogs of the gentry, trotting delicately behind their mistresses, their tiny paws barely touching the muck. Then there were the working dogs, the herders and the hunters, valued for their utility. And, of course, the vast majority were simply street dogs, the anonymous mongrels who eked out a living on the fringes of human society. They were the furry, four-legged equivalent of background noise, always present but rarely given a second thought. This wasn't some idyllic, pastoral scene of harmonious coexistence, mind you. These were tough times, and the relationship between humans and animals was far more pragmatic than sentimental. A dog was useful, or it wasn't. A dog was healthy, or it was a nuisance. And in a city with rudimentary sanitation and a burgeoning population, nuisance could quickly escalate to threat. It's tempting to romanticize medieval life, to imagine quaint cottages and jolly minstrels, but the reality was often far more aromatic. The streets were open sewers, essentially collecting everything from household waste to industrial effluent. And amongst all this, dogs thrived. They were adaptable creatures, perfectly suited to scavenging, and their numbers grew. Historians still argue whether the sheer volume of dogs truly impacted public health, or if other factors were more significant. But regardless, the stage was set for a confrontation between man and beast, not born of malice, but of fear and a desperate attempt at control. It's almost funny, isn't it, to think of a city so desperate for order that it turns its attention to its furry inhabitants. You can almost hear the town crier clearing his throat with a flourish before proclaiming, Hear the, by royal decree, all woofing shall cease. A bit of an oversimplification, perhaps, but the sentiment was certainly there. As you continue your stroll through this grimy, fascinating London, you start to notice not just the absence of dogs, but the reasons why they might have become a problem. Imagine the narrow, unpaved streets, often more akin to muddy tracks, slick with rain and whatever else the horses and humans left behind. Rubbish, for the most part, wasn't neatly collected and carted away to some distant landfill. Instead, it was often tossed into the streets or into open ditches. This created a veritable feast for scavengers, and at the top of that food chain, alongside the ever-present rats and pigs, were the dogs. They were the original zero-waste advocates, long before it became a trendy lifestyle choice, diligently clearing away organic refuse. But with their sheer numbers, they became more than just efficient disposers of waste. You see, a medieval city was a sensory overload, and dogs contributed their fair share to the cacophony. Constant barking, especially at night, would have been a common nuisance, disrupting whatever meager sleep you could snatch in your cramped lodgings. Picture trying to drift off to the insistent yaps and growls from just outside your window, a furry symphony of discontent. Then there was the sheer physical presence, with no leash laws, no designated dog parks, and certainly no little bags to pick up after them. The streets were, shall we say, naturally decorated. You'd have to watch your step constantly, navigating not just the human traffic, but also the canine obstacles and their contributions to the urban landscape. It was a minefield of both solid and liquid unpleasantness, and no amount of elegant ruffles on your tunic could save you from an errant splash. Beyond the immediate annoyances, dogs posed more serious concerns for public health. While our understanding of disease was incredibly primitive back then, remember that crocodile dung sunscreen for skin maladies? Yes, things were that basic people did notice patterns. They understood, on a rudimentary level, that filth contributed to sickness, and a city teeming with uncontrolled animals, many of them scrawny and sickly, was a hotbed for various ailments. Fleas and ticks, carried by dogs, were a constant menace, not just as itchy inconveniences, but as vectors for diseases that people didn't yet understand. Think of it, you already living in an era where the average lifespan is considerably shorter than a Netflix binge. And now you have furry vectors of pestilence running rampant. It sounds like a bad historical reenactment gone wrong, doesn't it? One of the more mainstream historical facts about medieval urban life is the constant battle against disease, particularly epidemics. The Black Death was a recent, terrifying memory, having swept through Europe just a few decades prior to our story, wiping out an estimated third of the population. This catastrophe left a profound psychological scar, making people acutely aware of public health threats, even if their methods for combating them were, by modern standards, hilariously ineffective. The fear of contagion was palpable, a lurking shadow in every crowded alleyway. And in this climate of anxiety, anything that seemed to contribute to the spread of illness became a target. A quirky or fringe tidbit here involves the surprising legal standing of animals in some medieval European courts. While we're talking about a ban, it's worth noting that animals, including dogs, were sometimes put on trial for perceived crimes. Imagine a court proceeding where a dog is formally accused of damaging property, or, even more bizarrely, of witchcraft. These trials, often conducted with all the gravity of a human trial, complete with lawyers and witnesses, highlight the fascinating and often perplexing relationship medieval society had with the animal kingdom. It suggests a blurry line between animal instinct and human-like culpability, a concept we find utterly alien today. It also speaks to the desperation to find explanations and assign blame when faced with inexplicable events, like widespread disease or sudden misfortunes. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for the London dog ban was genuinely public health concern, or if it was more about social control and tidiness in an increasingly crowded urban environment. Was it a calculated public health initiative, however misguided, or simply a desperate attempt by authorities to bring some semblance of order to the chaotic streets, tired of stepping in what the dogs left behind? Perhaps it was a combination of both, a practical measure justified by the looming specter of disease. Regardless, the stage was set for a dramatic shift in the city's relationship with its canine companions, a shift that would prove to be anything but simple. You can almost hear the sighs of exasperation from the city alderman, looking out at the dog-filled thoroughfares and muttering, "Something must be done about those blasted creatures." Little did they know the Pandora's box they were about to open. Now, imagine you're still navigating those medieval London streets, perhaps carefully sidestepping a particularly muddy patch, when a new, far more insidious threat begins to loom large: rabies. While dogs had always been a part of the urban landscape, the rising incidence of rabies outbreaks cast a terrifying shadow over their presence. This wasn't some minor inconvenience, like a dog rummaging through your scraps. This was a death sentence. In an age before vaccines, before even a rudimentary understanding of viruses, rabies was a truly horrifying disease. You'd see the symptoms, slowly at first: a dog acting strangely, perhaps unusually aggressive or unusually docile, its eyes glazed, drool perhaps beginning to form at its mouth. Then would come the terrifying mad dog phase, where the animal would foam at the mouth, bite indiscriminately, and spread the disease with every desperate lunge. And once the infection passed to a human, the outcome was almost universally fatal. The symptoms were gruesome: agonizing muscle spasms, hydrophobia, a terrifying aversion to water, even the thought of it, leading to a torturous death. Imagine the terror. No cure, no relief, just a slow, agonizing descent into madness and death. It's enough to make you want to wrap yourself in a blanket and never leave the house, isn't it? So, while dogs had been a nuisance before, rabies elevated them to a public menace. The fear was palpable, spreading faster than any rumor through the crowded city. People saw their neighbors, their children, suffering and dying from this incomprehensible affliction, and the source, often, was a dog bite. It created a climate of suspicion and fear around every stray, every barking shadow. This was a fear far more profound than that of a spoiled nobleman's lapdog tripping you up. This was about survival. One mainstream historical fact about rabies in this period is that it was a known and greatly feared disease across Europe, even if its cause wasn't understood. Medieval physicians, limited by their knowledge, often resorted to folk remedies or prayers, none of which, of course, had any effect on the viral infection. They might try cauterizing the wound or applying various poultices, but once symptoms appeared, hope was lost. The response was often one of desperate containment and, tragically, elimination of suspected animals. It was a brutal but, in their limited understanding, logical step. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era relates to some of the bizarre attempts at preventing rabies in humans. People would carry small bags of garlic, believing its pungent odor would ward off diseased animals. Others wore charms or talismans inscribed with obscure symbols, hoping for divine protection. There were even instances of people consuming the hair of a rabid dog, a truly desperate and likely ineffective measure, believing it might somehow confer immunity. It speaks to the utter desperation and lack of scientific understanding in the face of such a terrifying and deadly illness. You can almost picture someone whispering, "Just a little more garlic, darling. It'll keep the mad dogs away," as if the smell alone could act as a force field. Historians still argue whether the actual incidence of rabies was dramatically increasing at this specific time in London, or if the fear was amplified by anecdotal evidence and the general anxiety following the plague. Was it a true epidemic of rabid dogs, or a moral panic fueled by superstition and a lack of medical knowledge? The records are often incomplete, making it difficult to definitively pinpoint the exact prevalence. However, what is undeniable is the perception, the belief that dogs were a primary vector for this dreadful disease. This perception, whether entirely accurate or not, was enough to push the city's authorities toward a drastic solution. The city fathers, peering nervously at every wagging tail, likely decided that prevention, however extreme, was better than endless funerals. The rising tide of fear, fueled by the terrifying reality of rabies and the general unsanitary conditions, finally converged into a single, decisive moment. Imagine the atmosphere in the halls of power, perhaps in Guildhall itself, where the Lord Mayor and Aldermen of London would convene. The air would be thick with the smoke from tallow candles, the rustle of parchment, and the grave discussions of civic duty. You can almost picture them hunched over tables, their expressions grim as they receive reports of new rabies cases, of children bitten, of the general chaos that the city's burgeoning dog population contributed to. They were, in their own way, trying to manage a truly monstrous problem with the limited tools at their disposal. They couldn't vaccinate. They couldn't even effectively quarantine. So, what was left? Elimination. And so, the decision was made. The official decree, likely issued sometime in the 14th century, though historians still debate the exact year. And the specific wording was a stark and unprecedented order. All dogs were to be removed from the City of London. This wasn't a suggestion or a gentle nudge. It was a mandate delivered with the full authority of the city's governing body. The sheer audacity of it is almost comical in hindsight, isn't it? To attempt to rid a sprawling medieval metropolis of an entire species that had coexisted with humans for millennia. It's like trying to ban pigeons from Trafalgar Square. A noble, if utterly futile, ambition. This was a mainstream historical fact, though often overlooked in grander narratives of medieval life. While no single, universally agreed-upon dog ban date exists that covered all of Europe definitively, London's specific measures are well documented as a significant attempt to control canine populations due to public health concerns. It wasn't just a local ordinance, it was a symptom of a broader European anxiety about disease and urban sanitation. Cities like Paris also enacted similar, albeit often less stringent, regulations concerning dogs around this time, reflecting a common struggle with the challenges of dense urban living and limited hygiene. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit, there's evidence suggesting that while the ban was sweeping, the definition of a dog could sometimes be flexible. Imagine a desperate Londoner, perhaps a butcher, whose dog was indispensable for herding animals or guarding his shop. He might argue to the enforcement officers that his dog was, in fact, a particularly large, unusually quiet badger, or perhaps a domesticated fox. The ingenuity born of desperation can lead to some truly hilarious attempts at circumvention, can't it? Whether these excuses ever worked, well, that's another story. But the very thought of it paints a vivid picture of the human spirit attempting to bend the rules. Historians still argue whether the primary driver behind the decree was truly the immediate threat of rabies, or if it was more fundamentally about general urban sanitation and control. Was rabies the final straw, or merely a convenient justification for a move already being contemplated to make the city tidier and less chaotic? The records don't always provide the definitive smoking gun of intent, leaving room for scholarly debate. Some argue that the repeated outbreaks of plague had instilled such a deep-seated fear of contagion that any potential vector, even if less deadly, was seen as an intolerable risk. Others point to the more prosaic issue of public order and the desire for a cleaner city in an era utterly devoid of modern sanitation. Regardless of the precise motivations, the impact of this royal decree would ripple through every corner of London life. You might imagine the immediate shock, the confused glances between neighbors, followed by a scramble. What do you do with your dog? Do you obey, or do you resist? The Lord Mayor's proclamation, read by town criers in every square, would have landed like a thunderclap, forcing every resident to confront a new and unsettling reality. The bustling, dog-filled streets you'd grown accustomed to were about to change, perhaps forever. It was a bold move, a dramatic social experiment, and like most experiments, it came with a host of unforeseen consequences. You can almost feel the collective sigh of confusion and mild outrage from the dog owners of medieval London. My Rover, a public menace, nonsense. So, the royal decree was out. London was to become a dog-free zone. But how did the citizens, from the wealthiest merchant to the poorest commoner, actually react to such an unprecedented command? You might imagine a wave of immediate compliance, everyone rushing to obey the powerful authorities. But history, as always, is far more nuanced, and human nature delightfully stubborn. The public reaction was, predictably, a mixed bag of fear, confusion, frustration, and in many cases, outright defiance. Think about it from your perspective as a Londoner. If you were a wealthy lord or lady, your pampered lapdog was less a working animal and more a status symbol, an affectionate companion, perhaps even a furry hot water bottle on a cold night. To suddenly be told that this beloved creature, perhaps a gift from a foreign dignitary, had to be removed, would have been an affront to your dignity, a direct challenge to your personal liberties. You'd likely employ various strategies, perhaps sending your dogs to a country estate, far from the prying eyes of city officials, or discreetly keeping them hidden within your sprawling townhouse. After all, who was going to question you? You had influence, connections, and probably a few gold coins to smooth over any misunderstandings. But what if you were a working-class Londoner, perhaps a butcher, relying on his powerful mastiff to guard his shop at night from thieves, or a rat catcher whose small terrier was indispensable for controlling vermin? A crucial task in a city perpetually overrun with rodents. For these individuals, the ban wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a threat to their livelihood. Your dog wasn't just a pet, it was a tool, a partner in your daily grind. Losing it meant losing income, losing security. The anger and frustration would have been palpable. You'd likely grumble to your neighbors, perhaps share a pint of ale, while devising schemes to keep your faithful companion hidden. This widespread, albeit varied, public reaction is a fascinating mainstream historical fact. While the decree was official, its enforcement was another matter entirely. The sheer volume of dogs and the deep-seated relationship people had with them made immediate, wholesale compliance virtually impossible. It wasn't like banning a new, unpopular tax. It was about severing ancient bonds. People had lived alongside dogs for generations, their lives intertwined in countless ways, from the practical to the emotional. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Records suggest that some Londoners attempted to disguise their dogs as other animals to avoid detection. Imagine a small yappy terrier, perhaps dyed a dubious shade of brown, being passed off as a very peculiar badger or a house squirrel. While surely not fooling anyone with even half a brain, the sheer absurdity of the attempts highlights the desperation and the slightly rebellious humor of the time. You can picture a nervous owner sweating profusely, trying to convince a skeptical official that their creature, which just barked, was in fact a particularly vocal ferret. It's almost too ridiculous to be true, but it perfectly captures the spirit of human ingenuity when faced with an inconvenient rule. Historians still argue whether the level of public resistance was a significant factor in the long-term effectiveness of the ban, or if it was simply a logistical impossibility to enforce perfectly. Did the sheer volume of hidden dogs and the refusal of many citizens to comply ultimately undermine the decree? Or was the ban always destined to be more of a symbolic gesture, a desperate measure to be seen as doing something about a public health crisis? It's a complex chicken and egg question. Was the ban ineffective because people resisted? Or did people resist because it was inherently unenforceable? Regardless, the streets, while perhaps less overrun, were certainly not entirely dog-free. The quiet whine of a hidden dog, or the furtive glimpse of a tail disappearing around a corner, would have been a common, if hushed, occurrence. The city may have legislated against its canine inhabitants, but the bonds between humans and their furry friends proved surprisingly resilient, much like trying to keep a secret in a small village. Good luck with that. With the decree in place and public opinion swirling, the unenviable task of actually enforcing the dog ban fell to a specific group, the dog catchers. Now, this wasn't exactly a coveted position. Imagine your job description: roam the winding, often unsanitary streets of medieval London, identify dogs, and then, well, deal with them. It sounds less like a public service and more like a never-ending, thankless, and probably quite odorous chore. These weren't professional animal control officers with tranquilizer darts and padded vans. These were men, likely from the lower rungs of society, armed with nets, ropes, and a great deal of patience, or perhaps desperation. You can picture them, 2 or 3 figures, perhaps with rudimentary leather aprons to protect against bites, trudging through the mud and refuse. They'd be scanning the alleys, listening for a telltale bark, their eyes peeled for any 4-legged silhouette. It was a cat-and-mouse game, except with dogs, and the mice often had teeth. Their methods would have been blunt. If they caught a dog, its fate was sealed. Most likely, it meant immediate dispatch, often by drowning in the Thames or some other equally grim method. This was a pragmatic, not a compassionate era. Sentimentality for animals, especially those deemed a public health threat, was a luxury few could afford. This task, and the existence of specific individuals or groups tasked with it, is a mainstream historical fact. While the term dog catcher might sound modern, the concept of enforcing animal control through dedicated personnel is evident in various medieval urban ordinances. These individuals were often paid a meager sum per dog caught, creating an incentive for ruthless efficiency. It wasn't a job you took for the love of animals, let's just say. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Some accounts suggest that these dog catchers faced significant public backlash, especially from dog owners who deeply resented the intrusion and the fate of their beloved pets. You might imagine angry confrontations, shouted insults from windows, or even physical resistance. There are whispers of dog catchers being pelted with rotten vegetables, or even worse, becoming targets for elaborate pranks designed to trip them up or lead them on wild goose chases through the city's labyrinthine streets. It wasn't always a straightforward capture. Sometimes it was a full-blown street skirmish, perhaps with a dog owner strategically opening a window and pouring out a chamber pot just as a dog catcher passed below. Medieval humor. Historians still argue whether the efficacy of these dog catchers was genuinely high, or if their presence served more as a deterrent and a symbol of authority rather than a means of complete eradication. Was it a truly effective culling, significantly reducing the dog population? Or was it merely a Sisyphean task, with new strays constantly appearing and hidden pets being cleverly concealed? The records are often vague on exact numbers, making it difficult to assess their true impact. It's likely a bit of both, a reduction, but never a complete triumph. You can almost hear the dog catchers, at the end of a long, frustrating day, slumping onto a bench, muttering about the futility of it all, wondering if every shadow held a hidden terrier. The smell of wet dog, even in its absence, probably haunted their dreams. Their work was a testament to the city's grim determination, and also to the enduring bond between humans and their canine companions, even when faced with the direst of decrees. So, the dog catchers were out, grimly performing their duties, but as you might expect, human ingenuity, especially when it comes to protecting beloved companions, knows no bounds. The decree to ban all dogs spurred a wave of creative and sometimes outright desperate measures among Londoners to hide their hounds. This wasn't just about defiance. It was about protecting family members, livelihoods, and even, for some, a connection to a simpler, more comforting world amidst the chaos of medieval life. Imagine you are a small shopkeeper, and your loyal terrier, Pip, is not just a pet but your alarm system, barking at suspicious characters lurking outside your establishment after dark. You can't just get rid of Pip, so what do? You adapt. Perhaps Pip is now confined to the back room during the day, scurrying under counters at the sound of approaching footsteps. Or maybe he's tucked away in a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, a canine secret agent waiting for nightfall. It was a constant game of hide-and-seek, with the stakes being Pip's very existence. For the wealthier citizens, the solutions might have been more elaborate. Think of grand townhouses with multiple floors, hidden staircases, and servants who were loyal to their masters, not necessarily to city ordinances. A pampered lapdog might have been kept almost entirely indoors, never seeing the light of day, living a strangely secluded life of luxury. Perhaps a designated servant's job became the constant vigilance against official inspection, ushering the furry friend into a secret chamber at the first sign of trouble. It's almost like a medieval version of a speakeasy, but for dogs, isn't it? Whisper the secret word, and you too can pet a forbidden pug. This widespread practice of hiding animals is a fascinating, if sometimes anecdotal, mainstream historical fact. While no official records detail the number of hidden dogs, the very need for the dog catchers to be so vigilant and the reports of citizens being fined for harboring dogs suggest it was a common and persistent problem for the authorities. The human-animal bond, it turns out, is a powerful force, capable of inspiring considerable risk-taking. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from the era. Some desperate owners reportedly tried to disguise their dogs, not just hide them. We touched on this earlier, but imagine the sheer absurdity of it. Picture a scrawny mutt with a poorly applied coat of dye, perhaps made from berry juice or soot, attempting to pass as a very large cat or an unusual sheep. Or perhaps a dog being fitted with clumsy, ill-fitting garments, hoping to obscure its true form from a passing official. While these attempts were likely unsuccessful, and perhaps even more likely to draw attention, they speak volumes about the lengths to which people would go. You can almost hear the official sighing, "My good man, that sheep just barked at me and tried to lick my face. I believe we have a canine here." Historians still argue whether the persistence of hidden dogs ultimately contributed to the band's eventual decline, or if other factors, like the rising rat population, played a more significant role. Was the band slowly undermined by the sheer number of discreetly kept pets, making comprehensive enforcement an impossible dream? Or did the ban simply become less relevant as new public health concerns emerged, and the fear of rabies, perhaps, subsided? It's difficult to quantify the precise impact of these hidden pets, but they certainly made the dog catchers' lives a good deal more challenging. The city might have officially declared itself dog-free, but in the quiet corners of London, behind closed doors, and in shadowed alleyways, the soft thud of a wagging tail, or the gentle snore of a sleeping dog, would have continued to be a secret symphony. As dogs began to disappear from London's streets, whether by decree or by clever concealment, a curious and largely unforeseen consequence began to emerge, a significant economic fallout. You might not immediately connect the absence of wagging tails with the city's financial health, but in a tightly woven medieval economy, even seemingly minor shifts could create unexpected ripples. This wasn't just about losing pets, it was about disrupting established systems and the subtle, often unacknowledged, roles dogs played in the urban ecosystem. Consider, for a moment, the various trades that directly or indirectly relied on dogs. There were the dog breeders, who, even in a less formalized sense than today, would have supplied animals for hunting, herding, or companionship. Their livelihood would have taken an immediate hit. Then there were the vendors of dog-related goods, special collars, leashes, even rudimentary remedies for canine ailments. While perhaps not a booming industry, it certainly contributed to the local economy. And let's not forget the unofficial dog walkers or feeders, often children or impoverished individuals who earned a few coppers by looking after other people's pets. Their small incomes would have vanished overnight. It's like trying to remove all the squirrels from a park. You might not think they contribute much, but then you realize how many tourists actually like feeding them. Furthermore, dogs played a role in waste management. While they were also a source of mess, they were incredibly efficient scavengers. With fewer dogs, the burden of waste disposal, already a monumental challenge in medieval London, would have increased. More rotting food in the streets meant more work for human scavengers, if they existed, or simply more festering refuse contributing to disease. This could have indirectly impacted trade by making the city even less appealing for merchants and visitors, potentially leading to a subtle downturn in commerce. This surprising financial impact is a mainstream historical fact, albeit one often buried in the broader discussions of public health. Historians have noted how interconnected medieval economies were, and how changes in one area, even seemingly minor ones, could cascade into others. The cost of maintaining public health, even through extreme measures like a dog ban, rarely came without its own financial overhead. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. Imagine the black market for dog-related goods that might have sprung up. If you were still secretly harboring your beloved hound, you'd need supplies. Perhaps a furtive exchange in a shadowy alleyway where a shifty-eyed merchant whispers peased, "Fancy some genuine Hecoloty, totally legal dog biscuits. No questions asked, gouverneur." This illicit trade, while likely small, would have been a fascinating subplot to the city's grand canine drama, hinting at the lengths people would go to for their furry friends, and the entrepreneurial spirit that thrives even under the most unusual bans. Historians still argue whether the overall economic impact of the dog ban was truly significant, or if it was merely a temporary inconvenience absorbed by the larger, more resilient medieval economy. Was it a substantial drain on resources, or a minor blip quickly overcome? It's difficult to quantify precisely, as economic data from the period is sparse and often incomplete. However, the anecdotal evidence and logical deductions suggest that while not catastrophic, the bans certainly created financial disruptions for certain segments of the population. You can almost hear the sighs of merchants tallying their books, muttering, "If only we still had old Fido, business would be booming." Or perhaps, well, at least we're saving on kibble, I suppose. Every cloud, as they say, has a silver lining, even a dog-free one. With the dogs gone, or at least significantly reduced in number, another, rather predictable, consequence began to plague the streets of London. Rats rejoice. You see, dogs, especially the scruffier, less pedigreed variety, had always served a crucial, albeit unglamorous, role as natural pest control. They hunted rats, chased mice, and generally kept the rodent population somewhat in check. Remove the predators, and what do you get? A population explosion of the prey. It's basic ecology. even if medieval Londoners didn't have a textbook for it. Imagine the quiet creep of shadows in the dimly lit alleys, the rustling behind barrels, the undeniable scuttling sounds emanating from every dark corner. Without the constant threat of a dog, the rat population would have thrived, finding abundant food in the uncollected refuse that accumulated in the streets and markets. These were not cute cartoon rats. These were large, disease-carrying vermin, bold and unafraid. They would have swarmed through cellars, gnawed at stored food, and generally made life even more unpleasant in an already challenging urban environment. It's enough to make your skin crawl, isn't it? The thought of sharing your living space with an ever-growing army of furry, whiskered invaders. You might even find yourself wishing for the return of a friendly, albeit slobbery, hound. This rise in the rat population following the dog ban is a mainstream historical fact, often cited as a significant unintended consequence. While it's hard to get exact numbers for medieval rat populations, the logical link between removing a primary predator and an increase in its prey is undeniable. Furthermore, the historical record indicates that pest control remained a persistent problem in London and other European cities long after such canine culls. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from this period. With the absence of canine pest control, some Londoners reportedly tried to employ other, less effective animal proxies. Imagine desperate attempts to train ferrets for ratting, or even more bizarrely, bringing in large numbers of cats. While cats are indeed good ratters, they weren't present in the same numbers as street dogs, nor were they as easily controlled. Plus, cats have their own quirks. You can picture a frustrated citizen trying to cajole a finicky feline into chasing a particularly plump rat, only for the cat to leisurely groom itself instead. Come on, Whiskers. There's a perfectly good rat right there. Don't you want to earn your keep? It highlights the human tendency to find a quick fix, even if the solution is far from perfect. Historians still argue whether the increase in the rat population directly contributed to new outbreaks of disease, or if it simply exacerbated existing public health problems that were already prevalent due to poor sanitation. Was the rat surge a significant factor in disease transmission, or was it merely another unpleasant symptom of urban overcrowding and hygiene issues? The relationship between rats, fleas, and the spread of plague was not understood at the time, making it difficult for contemporary observers to draw direct causal links. However, from our modern perspective, the rise of a major disease vector, unchecked by its natural predators, certainly paints a grim picture. It's almost as if the city, in trying to solve one problem, inadvertently created another, perhaps even larger one. The sound of tiny claws scurrying in the darkness would have been a chilling reminder of the ban's unintended legacy. The absence of dogs, combined with the booming rat population, inevitably led to another fascinating, if slightly grim, development: the rise of canine contraband. You see, despite the official decree and the best efforts of the dog catchers, the demand for dogs didn't simply vanish. For those who relied on them for work, or who simply couldn't bear to part with their loyal companions, the ban created a fertile ground for an illicit trade. Imagine the shadowy corners of London's less reputable docks, or the darkened back rooms of taverns, where hushed conversations might take place. PST, looking for a good ratter, Gouvernail, fresh from the countryside, quiet as a mouse. Until he sees one, that is, smugglers, ever opportunistic, would have seen the ban not as a barrier, but as a business opportunity. Dogs, especially puppies or small, easily concealed breeds, would have been brought in from rural areas surrounding London, or even from across the continent, carefully hidden amongst legitimate cargo. A bundle of hay might conceal a yelping litter, or a seemingly empty barrel might have a furry occupant. It was a risky business, of course, but the profits from a desperate buyer could make it worth the danger. This phenomenon of a black market for banned goods, including animals, is a mainstream historical fact that recurs throughout history whenever strict prohibitions are enacted. Human desire and economic incentive often find ways around even the most stringent laws. It's like Prohibition-era America, but instead of bathtub gin, you're dealing with back-alley terriers. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. There are anecdotal accounts of highly specialized smugglers who developed elaborate methods to sneak dogs into the city. Imagine dogs being drugged with opium to keep them quiet during transport, or even disguised in elaborate, specially designed crates that resembled legitimate goods. Perhaps a dog was taught to remain perfectly still, like a statue, to avoid detection during inspections. A truly remarkable feat of animal training, if true. You can almost picture a bewildered customs official peering into a crate, convinced he heard a whimper, only to see a perfectly motionless, seemingly lifeless bundle of fur staring back. Just a very quiet sack of wool, sir. Nothing to see here. Historians still argue whether the volume of canine contraband was significant enough to genuinely undermine the ban, or if it was merely a niche activity catering to a small, determined clientele. Was the black market a constant leak in the dam of prohibition, or just a series of isolated trickles? The clandestine nature of such activities makes accurate record-keeping impossible, leaving much to scholarly speculation. However, the very existence of such a trade suggests that the desire for dogs, whether for companionship or utility, was powerful enough to resist official decrees. The rustle of straw, the soft whimper in the dark, and the furtive exchange of coins would have been the secret soundtrack of London's hidden canine world. The drastic measures taken to ban dogs in London also highlight a truly fundamental problem of the era: the primitive state of veterinary void. Imagine living in a time when a beloved pet, or even a crucial working animal, fell ill, and your options for treatment were incredibly limited, often consisting of folk remedies, superstition, or simply waiting for the inevitable. There were no licensed veterinarians as we understand them today, no antibiotics, no understanding of germ theory. When a dog showed symptoms of rabies or any other serious ailment, the response was one of fear and often, unfortunately, immediate, brutal extermination, rather than an attempt at cure. If your dog was suddenly listless or coughing or had a strange lump, you might turn to a local wise woman or a farrier who dabbled in animal ailments, but their knowledge would have been based on centuries of trial and error, not scientific understanding. Remedies often involved herbal concoctions, poultices, or even bizarre rituals. Imagine trying to explain to a medieval animal doctor that your dog needed a vaccination. They'd likely stare at you blankly, perhaps offering a charm to ward off evil spirits instead. It was a time of immense vulnerability for animals, and by extension, for their human companions who relied on them. This lack of formal veterinary medicine is a mainstream historical fact, illustrating the broader limitations of medical knowledge in the medieval period. While there were certainly individuals who treated animals, farriers for horses, shepherds with knowledge of sheep ailments, a dedicated professional veterinary class with a scientific understanding of animal physiology and disease simply didn't exist. Animal health was often intertwined with human health concerns, particularly in the context of zoonotic diseases like rabies, but the approach was largely reactive and unsophisticated. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from the period. Some of the cures for animal ailments were truly astonishing. For instance, remedies for mad dog bites on humans sometimes involved concoctions containing burnt crab, or even more disturbingly, pulverized parts of the rabid animal itself, consumed in the desperate hope of an antidote. For the animals, less was recorded, but one can imagine similarly strange and ineffective treatments. You can almost hear a desperate owner force-feeding their ailing dog a mixture of ground herbs and spiderwebs, whispering, "Just a little more. Old friend, this will surely make you well." Historians still argue whether the absence of a robust veterinary profession genuinely contributed to the severity of rabies outbreaks, or if the disease was simply too virulent for any medieval medical intervention to truly control. Would better animal care have significantly reduced the spread? Or was the fundamental lack of understanding about viruses the insurmountable barrier? It's a complex question, but it's clear that without effective means to diagnose, treat, or prevent animal diseases, the only perceived solution to a crisis like rabies was often to eliminate the perceived source, leading directly to the drastic measure of the dog ban. The streets of London, in this sense, became a grim testament to the limitations of medical science in the face of nature's relentless challenges. As the dog ban took hold and the city grappled with its consequences, an older, more profound societal trauma undoubtedly played a significant, if subconscious, role in people's reactions. The echoes of the plague, you see, the Black Death, which had swept through Europe just decades before our London dog ban, was not merely a historical event. It was a deeply etched scar on the collective psyche. This terrifying pandemic, responsible for wiping out an estimated 1/3 to 1/2 of Europe's population, left behind a legacy of fear, suspicion, and a desperate desire to avoid a repeat. Imagine yourself as a survivor of the plague. You would have witnessed unimaginable suffering, seen entire families perish, and lived through a period where death was an ever-present specter. The memory of carts piled high with bodies, the agonizing cries of the sick, and the sheer helplessness in the face of such a devastating disease would have been fresh and raw. This wasn't abstract history, it was personal, visceral memory. So, when another disease, like rabies, began to spread, a disease that caused horrific symptoms and almost certain death, it would have triggered a profound sense of déjà vu. The fear of contagion, of an invisible killer lurking in the air or carried by animals, was not just a logical concern. It was a deeply ingrained terror. This psychological hangover from the Black Death is a mainstream historical fact, widely recognized by scholars studying post-plague societies. The trauma fundamentally altered social structures, religious beliefs, and, crucially, public health attitudes. People became acutely sensitive to any potential source of illness, even if their scientific understanding of disease transmission was still rudimentary. The collective memory of mass death made them willing to accept and even demand drastic measures in the name of prevention. Now for a quirky or fringe tidbit from this era. In the immediate aftermath of the Black Death, There were various, bizarre, and often contradictory attempts to purify the air or ward off disease, which sometimes extended to animals. People would burn aromatic herbs in their homes, believing the smoke cleansed the air. Some even put small bags of potent herbs around their necks or in their pockets. You can almost picture someone attaching a miniature, pungent sachet of lavender or rosemary to their dog's collar, hoping to protect their furry friend from the ill humors that caused sickness. It highlights the strange mix of fear and superstition that permeated daily life, where desperate measures were often adopted without any real understanding of their efficacy. Historians still argue whether the direct fear of rabies was the sole driving force behind the dog ban, or if it was inextricably intertwined with the pervasive, lingering trauma and heightened anxieties left by the Black Death. Was the rabies outbreak merely the most visible catalyst for a ban that was, in essence, a societal overreaction stemming from the deeper, more profound fear of another plague? It's difficult to separate these threads, as both public health concerns and deep-seated psychological impacts would have influenced the decisions of the city's leaders. The dog ban, in this light, wasn't just about dogs. It was about a city desperately trying to assert control over an invisible enemy, armed with nothing but fear and an imperfect understanding of the world. It was a societal sigh of never again, even if they didn't quite know what they were trying to prevent again. Interestingly, London was not alone in its attempts to manage its canine population, especially when faced with perceived threats. As you journey through this peculiar historical landscape, you'll discover that while London's ban might feel extreme, similar, often lesser-known dog bans or strict controls were enacted in other European cities. It seems that the challenges of urban living, coupled with rudimentary sanitation and the fear of disease, led many civic authorities to similar, if not identical, conclusions about their furry inhabitants. Imagine traveling to a bustling city like Paris in the late medieval or early modern period. While perhaps not a total, sweeping ban like London's, Parisian authorities also grappled with the issue of street dogs. There were ordinances about stray animals, laws concerning the removal of carcasses, and regulations on where certain types of animals could be kept. The aim was often the same: to reduce nuisances, control the spread of disease, and generally maintain a semblance of order in increasingly crowded urban centers. It's almost as if medieval city planners across the continent were all sharing notes, perhaps via carrier pigeon, on how to deal with the canine question. My dear Lord Mayor, have you tried simply getting rid of them? This occurrence of similar regulations across different European cities is a mainstream historical fact, demonstrating a common thread in urban planning and public health concerns of the era. The growth of cities brought new challenges, and animal populations were frequently identified as contributing factors to disease and disorder, leading to various forms of control. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit related to these broader European efforts. In some German towns, for instance, dogs were occasionally required to wear small bells or tags, not just for identification, but to signal their presence, particularly at night. This wasn't a ban, but a form of regulated coexistence, an early attempt at canine noise control. You can almost hear the jingling symphony of 1,000 tiny bells as you walk through a medieval German village, a rather charming, if somewhat incessant, background noise. It highlights the diverse approaches taken to manage animal populations, ranging from outright prohibition to quirky forms of auditory regulation. Historians still argue whether these widespread attempts at dog control were genuinely effective in preventing epidemics, or if they were largely symbolic gestures reflecting a desperate pre-scientific approach to public health. Did these measures truly reduce the incidence of rabies or other diseases? Or were they simply a societal response to fear and a visible attempt by authorities to do something in the face of widespread anxiety? The lack of precise medical data from the period makes it hard to draw definitive conclusions. But the commonality of the problem across diverse regions suggests a shared urban dilemma. The European street dog, it seems, was a persistent challenge for medieval city fathers, a furry symbol of the era's sanitation struggles. Despite the sweeping nature of London's dog ban, you can probably guess that a complete eradication was next to impossible. And indeed, even in the midst of such a strict decree, there were always the ban's loopholes. No law, particularly in a medieval city with complex social structures, is ever airtight. Exceptions were made, permissions were granted, and sometimes rules were simply bent for those with enough influence or a compelling enough reason. It's a classic tale, isn't it? The more absolute the rule, the more ingenious the methods of evasion. Consider the royal court or high-ranking nobles. You might imagine that the king or queen, or their closest advisors, wouldn't simply part with their cherished hunting hounds, or their wives' pampered lapdogs. These animals weren't just pets, they were symbols of status, tools for sport, and sometimes even political gifts. It's a mainstream historical fact that exemptions for royal or aristocratic privilege were common in medieval law. A decree that applied to the common folk might mysteriously not apply to those at the very top. So, while you, the average Londoner, might be forced to hide your beloved terrier, a duke's greyhounds would likely continue to prance about, perhaps even with a smug look on their long faces. It's the medieval equivalent of having a VIP pass, isn't it? Then there were the legitimate working dogs, though their numbers might have been reduced. While the general ban was broad, certain vital roles might have necessitated specific exemptions. Think of shepherds bringing their flocks through the city for market, accompanied by their indispensable sheepdogs, or perhaps guard dogs for critical installations like the Tower of London or those used by authorized rat catchers. While the emphasis was on banning dogs, authorities likely recognized that some canine assistance was simply irreplaceable for certain tasks. It was a delicate balance between public safety and practical necessity. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit. There are some hints that medical or comfort animals, even in a rudimentary sense, might have been given special dispensation, while not formally recognized as service animals in the modern sense. A dog belonging to an elderly, infirm, or visually impaired individual might have been quietly tolerated, perhaps with a special badge or token issued by a sympathetic local official. Imagine a small, official-looking, albeit slightly muddy, piece of parchment tied to a dog's collar, silently proclaiming, "I am allowed here, thank you very much." It speaks to the human capacity for compassion, even in the face of draconian laws. Historians still argue whether these loopholes and exemptions significantly weakened the overall impact of the ban, or if they were merely minor concessions that didn't fundamentally alter its intent. Did the existence of privileged dogs undermine the public health goals, or were these exceptions too few to matter? The debate often revolves around the true effectiveness of medieval decrees in general. Were they truly enforced universally, or were they more aspirational statements of intent? Regardless, the presence of these exceptions certainly added another layer of complexity to the lives of Londoners, highlighting the stark differences in how laws could be applied depending on one's social standing. It's almost as if they said, "No dogs for you, but for them." Well, that's a different story. The dog ban, with all its enforcement efforts and loopholes, inevitably led to subtle but profound cultural shifts in how Londoners viewed and interacted with dogs. You see, when something that has been an ubiquitous part of daily life is suddenly removed or relegated to the shadows, it changes the collective consciousness. The presence of dogs, once taken for granted, became a matter of regulation, suspicion, and even illicit desire. Imagine the subtle anxiety that would have settled over dog owners. No longer could your pet freely roam. Instead, it was a source of potential trouble, a reason for a visit from the dog catchers, or a fine. This would have shifted the relationship from one of casual companionship to something more clandestine, more guarded. Dogs became less visible members of the community and more treasured, hidden secrets. This forced intimacy, perhaps ironically, might have deepened the bond between some owners and their pets as they conspired together against the authorities. It's like having a secret best friend, isn't it? One you have to keep hidden in your closet. This alteration in human canine relationships is a fascinating, if subtle, mainstream historical fact. While records don't explicitly state people loved their dogs more after the ban, the very act of defiance, the lengths people went to hide their pets, speaks volumes about the emotional connection. The ban didn't eradicate the bond, it merely pushed it underground, changing its nature. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit related to this shift. Some historians suggest that during this period, certain types of indoor entertainment or companion activities might have become more popular as alternatives to outdoor dog-related pastimes. Perhaps more people took up indoor games, or storytelling, or even quiet contemplation. As the bustling dog-filled outdoor life became more constrained, or perhaps, conversely, the yearning for animal companionships simply shifted to smaller, more easily hidden creatures like birds or even ferrets. You can almost picture a lonely Londoner staring longingly at a caged bird, wishing it were a boisterous hound. Oh, little Robin, if only you could fetch. Historians still argue whether this cultural shift was merely a temporary adaptation that faded once the ban loosened, or if it had a more lasting impact on the perception of dogs in London society. Did it permanently alter the city's relationship with its canine inhabitants, making them more domesticated and less wild in the long run? Or did the old ways simply reassert themselves once the immediate threat was gone? The evidence is often anecdotal, leaving much to interpretation, but it's clear that for a time, London became a city where the absence of dogs was as defining as their former presence, shaping the very fabric of daily life in ways both large and small. It's almost as if the city developed a collective phantom limb syndrome, always subconsciously aware of the missing pitter-patter of paws. The dog ban in London, while intended to solve one problem, inevitably triggered a cascade of unforeseen side effects. You see, when you pull a single thread from the intricate tapestry of an urban ecosystem, the entire fabric can shift in unexpected ways. Beyond the economic fallout and the rise of rats, the city began to experience other subtle, yet significant, changes that were a direct, if unintended, consequence of a canine-free environment. Imagine the quiet shift in the city's overall vibe. Dogs, even the scruffy street variety, contributed to the sensory landscape. Their barks served as impromptu alarm systems, their presence a form of low-level security. Without them, did the city feel slightly more vulnerable, particularly at night? The silence, where once there was the distant chorus of barking, might have been unnerving for some, especially those living in isolated areas or near the city's edges. It's like turning off the background music in a bustling cafe. Suddenly, you notice how quiet it is, and perhaps how much more exposed you feel. One mainstream historical fact to consider here is the impact on general urban cleanliness, or lack thereof. While dogs were sometimes a source of mess, they were also efficient scavengers. With fewer dogs, the burden on human waste management would have increased. More organic waste would have accumulated in the streets, potentially attracting more pests beyond just rats, such as flies and other insects, and leading to an even more pervasive foul odor. The city, in its attempt to be cleaner, might have inadvertently become even more unsanitary in different ways. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit related to these shifts. There's anecdotal evidence suggesting a subtle change in human nighttime routines. With fewer dogs barking at shadows or strangers, some citizens might have felt a heightened sense of unease or vulnerability, leading them to be more cautious about venturing out after dark, or perhaps relying more heavily on watchmen or community patrols. Imagine a nervous shopkeeper triple-checking his locks at night, listening intently to the unfamiliar silence, wishing for the familiar, reassuring bark of a dog just outside. It highlights how deeply integrated animals were into the unconscious rhythm of daily life. Historians still argue whether these specific, unforeseen side effects were truly significant enough to contribute to the ban's eventual decline, or if they were merely minor annoyances that the resilient medieval city learned to adapt to. Did the increased rat population, combined with a sense of diminished security and increased filth, create enough pressure to reconsider the ban? Or were these issues simply absorbed into the general challenges of medieval urban existence? The cause and effect relationships in historical events are often complex, making it difficult to isolate the precise impact of each variable. Nevertheless, the ban on dogs, intended as a targeted solution, rippled outwards, affecting far more than just the canine population. It reminds us that every action, however well-intentioned, can have a domino effect in the intricate dance of urban life. Given all the unforeseen consequences, the rat boom, the economic ripples, the cultural shifts, you might be wondering, when and why did this peculiar dog ban in London eventually fade away? The story of the ban's repeal isn't a single dramatic event, but rather a slow, gradual loosening of control, a quiet retreat from an unsustainable policy. Historians still debate the precise moment it officially ended, largely because it likely didn't end with a grand proclamation, but rather fizzled out through attrition and changing priorities. Imagine the city officials, perhaps a few decades after the initial decree, still grappling with overflowing refuse, relentless rats, and the low hum of public discontent. The initial panic over rabies might have subsided, or perhaps other, more pressing concerns had taken center stage. The sheer logistical nightmare of trying to maintain a truly dog-free city in a pre-industrial era would have become abundantly clear. It's like trying to sweep back the tide with a broom. Eventually, you just get tired. One mainstream historical fact is that public health priorities often shifted in medieval and early modern cities. While rabies was terrifying, new outbreaks of plague or other widespread diseases might have redirected official attention and resources. The focus might have moved from controlling animal populations to more general sanitation efforts, however rudimentary. Moreover, the inherent unenforceability of a total dog ban, as evidenced by the widespread hiding of pets and the black market trade, would have made maintaining the decree increasingly pointless and costly. What's the use of a law if everyone ignores it and it costs a fortune to try and enforce? Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit from historical records. There are hints that the ban might have been tacitly undermined by the very officials meant to enforce it. Imagine a weary dog catcher, tired of chasing phantom terriers and facing the ire of frustrated citizens, quietly turning a blind eye to a dog slipping by, especially if a small gratuity exchanged hands. Or, perhaps, a magistrate, overwhelmed by minor dog-related offenses, simply began dismissing cases or imposing minimal fines, signaling a softening of resolve from the top. It highlights the human element in law enforcement, where strict rules often bend under the weight of practicality and public sentiment. Historians still argue whether the primary reason for the ban's ultimate relaxation was the realization of its punitive ineffectiveness, the shift to other public health concerns, or simply the natural ebb and flow of urban policy over time. Was it a conscious decision to lift an unpopular and unworkable law, or did it simply become irrelevant as the immediate threat receded and other problems took precedence? The answer is likely a blend of all these factors. The city, in its pragmatic way, probably just quietly let the issue drop, allowing dogs to slowly, tentatively, re-establish their place in the urban fabric. The official decree might have remained on the books for a while, a dusty reminder of a bygone panic, but its teeth would have long since been dulled. As the strictness of the ban waned, London witnessed a gradual canine comeback. You wouldn't have seen hordes of dogs suddenly flood the streets overnight, but rather a slow, tentative re-emergence, a gradual reclaiming of their old territories. This return wasn't about official proclamations of welcome, but rather the quiet, persistent resilience of both human and canine nature. Imagine the sight, at first, perhaps a single stray, cautiously scavenging at the edges of the market, quickly darting away if spotted. Then, maybe a few more, bolder now, venturing further into the side streets. Owners, sensing the shifting tide, might have become less secretive, allowing their hidden pets a brief outdoor excursion, a quick trot around the block under the cover of dusk. The occasional bark, once a sound of alarm, would gradually become more common, slowly weaving its way back into the city's background symphony. It's like watching plants reclaim an abandoned building. Nature, or in this case, nature's best friend, always finds a way. This slow reintegration of dogs into urban life is a mainstream historical fact, typical of how social changes occur after periods of strict prohibition. As the perceived threat receded and the practical benefits of dogs became more apparent, the informal tolerance for them grew, preceding any official change in law. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit about this return. With fewer street dogs for a time, some Londoners, who managed to keep their pets, might have found themselves with unusually well-behaved animals, as strict indoor confinement would have curtailed many of their wilder instincts. Perhaps there were even instances of celebrity dogs, rare and cherished creatures whose continued existence symbolized a quiet defiance against the ban, making them local curiosities or objects of admiration. Imagine whispered tales of Old Bess, the dog who lived in a chimney for 5 years and never barked a day in her life. Historians still argue whether the speed of the canine comeback was dictated more by the natural reproductive rates of dogs, or by the increasing willingness of Londoners to simply ignore the fading ban. Was it a demographic phenomenon or a cultural one? It's likely both. As the old guard of zealous enforcement faded and the collective memory of the rabies scare dimmed, the inherent desire for companionship and the practical utility of dogs would have naturally reasserted themselves. The streets of London, once unnaturally quiet, would gradually have filled again with the patter of paws, and the occasional friendly woof, a testament to the enduring presence of dogs in human lives. The curious tale of London's dog ban, though centuries old, isn't just a quirky historical anecdote. It holds fascinating lessons and presents striking modern echoes in how societies respond to public health crises and perceived threats. You see, the impulse to control, to eliminate a visible source of fear, is a deeply ingrained human tendency, one that continues to play out in our contemporary world. Imagine our own recent experiences, the immediate, sometimes drastic, measures taken during pandemics, from lockdowns to mask mandates. While vastly different in scale and scientific understanding, the underlying societal impulse to identify a threat, implement a widespread solution, and deal with its unforeseen consequences remains remarkably similar. When faced with an invisible enemy, societies often react by targeting something tangible, something they can control, even if the connection isn't always perfectly direct or the methods are overly broad. It's a bit like swatting at a fly when you're really trying to kill a mosquito. The impulse is there, even if the target isn't quite right. This recurring pattern of societal response to perceived threats, particularly in public health, is a mainstream historical fact that sociologists and historians often study. The London dog ban serves as an early, albeit unusual, case study in the complexities of managing public fear and implementing widespread public health interventions. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit that brings this even closer to home. Consider modern-day debates around urban wildlife management. From debates over pigeon populations in city squares to deer in suburban neighborhoods, cities still grapple with how to manage animal populations that come into conflict with human desires for hygiene, safety, or order. Sometimes these debates become quite passionate, even in our scientifically advanced age. You can almost hear a modern city council meeting arguing about the nuisance of urban foxes, echoing the sentiments of medieval aldermen debating the problem of stray dogs. Historians still argue whether the effectiveness of historical bans like London's provides valuable lessons for modern public health policy, or if the vast differences in scientific knowledge and societal structures make direct comparisons misleading. Can we truly learn from a medieval dog ban about managing a global pandemic, or are the contexts too disparate? It's a complex discussion, but the underlying human psychological responses, fear, the desire for control, the unintended consequences, often transcend centuries. The tale of London's dog ban reminds us that even with all our modern advancements, the challenges of living in a complex, interconnected world and making decisions under pressure often lead to remarkably similar dilemmas, just with different furry antagonists. And so, we arrive at the enduring legacy of the leash, or perhaps more accurately, the legacy of its absence and eventual return. The peculiar period of London's dog ban, while a fleeting moment in the city's long history, left an indelible mark on how urban society viewed its relationship with animals, public health, and the delicate balance of control versus coexistence. Imagine London today, a city where dogs, once banned, now thrive in myriad forms, pampered pets in designer coats, working dogs assisting the disabled, police dogs patrolling, and countless canine companions bringing joy to their human families. This modern landscape is a testament to the enduring human-animal bond, one that ultimately proved more resilient than any royal decree. The ban wasn't a permanent severance. It was a challenging chapter, a period of forced revaluation of a relationship often taken for granted. This lasting influence on human-animal relations in urban settings is a mainstream historical fact, illustrating how even seemingly minor historical events can shape long-term cultural attitudes. The experience of the ban, however brief, likely contributed to a more conscious and perhaps ultimately more responsible approach to pet ownership and urban animal management. Here's a quirky or fringe tidbit to muse upon. One might wonder if the period of enforced canine absence indirectly contributed to the later Victorian era's burgeoning pet craze, particularly for small indoor-dwelling dogs. Perhaps the lingering memory of a dog-free London, combined with increased wealth and leisure, created a pent-up demand for canine companionship that exploded in the centuries that followed, leading to the highly sentimentalized view of pets we often hold today. It's almost as if the city collectively thought, well, that was dreary. Let's get all the dogs now. Historians still argue whether the memory of the dog ban, even if subconscious, influenced later public health policies in London, encouraging a more nuanced approach to animal control rather than outright prohibition. Did this historical episode serve as a quiet lesson about the complexities of urban ecosystems? Or was it largely forgotten, simply a blip in the city's tumultuous history? The debate highlights the difficulty of tracing subtle cultural influences across centuries. But the story of London's banned dogs remains a fascinating lens through which to view human fear, adaptation, and the enduring bond with our four-legged friends. As our journey through this curious chapter of history draws to a close, let your mind drift gently away from the bustling, muddy streets of medieval London and the shadows of its hidden hounds. The echoes of that time, the rustle of rats, the quiet desperation of owners, the stern commands of the city fathers, they all fade now. The anxieties of a bygone era, the challenges faced by those who lived centuries ago, they slowly dissolve like mist over the Thames at dawn. Allow the details to soften, the sharp edges of historical facts to blur into a gentle hum. There's no longer any need to worry about peculiar punishments or forgotten laws. Just the soft, comforting silence of the night. Feel yourself sinking deeper, feeling lighter with each breath. The story is complete, and the echoes of the past are now just whispers, lulling you into a peaceful, dreamless sleep. Sweet dream.